one of the main people who is in his administration, you can read her tweets. And there are many crazy ones, like just home ownership is racist, even though something like 40 million black people own homes.
Yes.
Okay, but also she'd vote more communists. I'm not paraphrasing.
Yes.
Vote more, and he stood by her.
Yes.
I mean, you don't have to read between the lines here.
And the Democrats, my God, please find somebody who can lead. Gavin Newsom is out here in California. Out here in California. Pulling off in his own way what I think he wants to. He's being known more for trolling Trump on his podcast or with other interviews than what he's actually doing in the state of California. They think that's leadership because they don't have it.
Bill Maher just went straight at the Democratic Party's entire comeback strategy. And honestly, the contradictions he is calling out are getting impossible to ignore, because ever since their crushing defeat in the last elections, the Democratic National Committee has launched comeback after comeback after comeback, multiple music pivots, multiple resets, multiple attempts to reclaim the narrative, yet none of it seems to be landing, not with voters, not with the media, not even with their own base. And now Bill Maher, in a recent episode of his long-running TV show, has exposed exactly why the party's strategy appears to be falling apart, and we have got every single detail right here. So, if you enjoy sharp political commentary with no sugarcoating, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and let's get right into it.
What the Democrats are not doing with this is leading. The energy in their parties with the young people who learn everything about Israel on TikTok. They don't know shit. And their leaders are not standing up and saying, kids, you don't know what's going on here. Every war Israel has fought is a war of defense.
Right.
Every war, they were attacked first.
Well,
and they're not doing that.
Bill Maher's read on this is blunt. He believes one of the Democratic National Committee's most costly failures is its reluctance to be fully transparent with younger voters, and let us not act like this is just a small messaging gap. It is not, in his view, the party is not just missing the mark, it may be actively shaping an incomplete, one-sided understanding of reality among an entire generation. The narratives are there. The omissions are there. The emotional framing is there. It is all part of how the conversation gets controlled. Music. Bill Maher argues that young people are being guided by selective versions of history and global affairs versions that leave out the context that would change everything, and his point is simple. If party leaders and influential voices within the Democratic National Committee actually took the time to deliver honest, balanced, fact-based history lessons, the outcome would be completely different. Young voters would be far more likely to question movements before joining them. They would not rally behind causes without knowing the full story. Instead, they develop a more grounded perspective, one rooted in context rather than emotion. And for Bill Maher, this goes well beyond bad outreach. This is a credibility issue that keeps compounding, and it is pushing the party further off course with every single cycle.
Would that to be with traditional and conventional Democrats? Let's have just a speck of empathy for them in this regard. You got a younger generation of progressive Democrats that pretty much are making their influence felt. And then you've got the old guard that are at the mercy of them. They want to maintain power. And you want to sit up, you got to receive votes. Look at what happened in New York City. No disrespect, but do we really think that Zohran Mamdani was the most qualified candidate to be mayor of New York City? Come on now, we know better. I'm wishing him well. I'm not being disrespectful. He's smart, he's sharp, he's quick on his feet. I'm not disrespecting him in any way. But he had never done anything. You got a governor, a former governor, who was a 3-term governor, coasting to his fourth before the scandal hit. You boot him out of office. He's qualified to get your...
And that brings us straight to a decision that raised a lot of eyebrows. Zohran Mamdani, as even Stephen A. Smith pointed out, was still relatively early in his political career when he was elevated to the top of the ticket in a high-stakes mayoral race, and critics argue that is a bold move for someone who had not yet proven himself on a stage that big. Meanwhile, Andrew Cuomo was sitting right there, a 3-term governor, battle-tested, proven on one of the biggest political stages in the country before his career was derailed by scandal. But that is the catch, is it not? Because once Andrew Cuomo stepped down, that scandal practically vanished from public conversation. The energy shifted, the outrage cooled, the media moved on. It was all over politically, reputationally, conversationally, and music. Yet instead of circling back to a seasoned, experienced figure whose controversy had already faded, the party turned its attention to Zohran Mamdani, a newer name on the political stage. with a much shorter track record, and from there the rest kind of writes itself. The contrast is hard to miss, and it raises real questions about the Democratic National Committee's decision, making its internal priorities, and whether depth of experience still carries the weight it once did.
3 terms, en route to 4 to run the state, but you don't want to run in the city. And you're going to hand the reins to a 33-year-old
he's also a communist.
Okay.
I mean, and I'm not saying that as a slur.
All right.
I'm saying that's his political view. It's a view you're allowed to have in this country, and people are allowed to vote for.
So you have people that don't mind that, and they want that in this country. And unfortunately, if you're a Chuck Schumer or some of the old guards, you're at the mercy of all of that, still trying to stay in office, knowing that you got voters out there that would support that ahead of you.
Critics argue that many young supporters within the Democratic National Committee are becoming increasingly attracted to ideas that resemble communism largely because of the way those ideas are presented to them. In their view, this attraction is not always the result of a deliberate or historically informed choice, but rather of messaging that emphasizes ideals while minimizing real-world outcomes. Leaders, such as Chuck Schumer, are often pointed to as experienced voices who should take a more active role in shaping this discussion by clearly explaining why the United States rejected communist systems in favor of capitalism using historical context, economic evidence, and global comparisons. Such leadership, critics believe, could help give younger voters a more balanced understanding. Without that kind of guidance, many young people may end up engaging with complex political ideologies without the full context, making them more vulnerable to adopting views that do not align with historical lessons or practical realities.
One of the main people who is in his administration, you can read her tweets, and there are many crazy ones, like just home ownership is racist, even though something like 40 million black people own homes.
Yes.
Okay, but also she'd vote more communists. I'm not paraphrasing. Yes. Vote more, and he stood by her.
Yes.
I mean, you don't have to read between the lines here.
Yes. Then turning around and asking the president for $21 billion.
Well, I mean, as the person who said Democrats are too weak and woke, I think that's your quote. I mean, this has got to be what you're talking about.
Bill Maher is absolutely tapping into something real when he argues that the Democratic National Committee keeps coming across as indecisive, cautious, reactive, and too easily shaped by the loudest voices in its own coalition. And let us not act like that perception came out of nowhere. It did not. For years, the party has been reluctant to push back against more polarizing positions within its own ranks. That reluctance has created a vacuum, and in that vacuum, ideas that sit further from the mainstream have found room to grow without meaningful internal debate. Now, nobody is arguing the Democratic National Committee does not value equality and social justice. Those have always been core pillars, but the moment those goals become tangled with positions perceived as leaning too far from the economic center, the credibility starts to erode. And critics argue it is eroding fast because most American voters still broadly favor free market capitalism as the backbone of the country's economic system that has not changed, that is not going anywhere. And if the Democratic National Committee keeps drifting away from that consensus, it is not just going to lose moderates, it risks unsettling the broader coalition entirely. And in a political landscape where perception shapes outcomes faster than policy ever does, that drift could carry real consequences at the ballot box.
I do think what you're getting at is, and I feel this when I travel, particularly in the middle of the country, like, it is hard to miss as an elected leader that people are so desperate for some kind of change. Like the young people in particular will either take it from you nicely or they will eventually kick down the door. It's just a matter of figuring out which one is going to come first. And I think the old guard has not yet caught up to the fact that the game that they learned to play, it's a totally different game now. It is a totally different operation, and they haven't adapted and they haven't left. And so no matter where you go, I think Mamdani is a New York City thing. I don't think that would work in other places.
Might work here.
It is true that many young people are demanding change, but critics argue that embracing communism is not the answer. That concern echoes what critics have been emphasizing. In their view, the real problem is not the desire for change itself, but the lack of grounded context shaping that desire. They argue that more experienced voices within the Democratic National Committee need to step in and clearly explain America's foreign policy choices and the foundations of its economic system. Music Without that kind of foundation, younger audiences are often left to build their understanding from fragmented and incomplete sources. One major concern, critics say, is the growing dependence on platforms like TikTok, where complicated issues are often compressed into short, emotionally charged clips, and when history and economics are reduced to that kind of bite-sized content, the result is often a shallow understanding rather than a complete one. So critics argue that many young people may not see the full picture, not because they are unwilling to understand, but because no one has truly given them the full picture.
I think it's a symptom of a bigger issue, which is the old guard of politics. It's done. It's over. It doesn't work anymore, and it's certainly, on my side of the aisle, not playing effective offense against Donald Trump.
Yet, there are things to be learned from Mamdani. You can take politics aside, policy aside. Very few Democrats, very few Republicans, I can't think of many, who have been able to insult, disparage, and go at Trump and still sometimes get results that are favorable for the people we represent with Trump's blessing.
For sure.
And part
because
of
he had him to the Oval Office.
Well, but whatever, he had the fake kid, the headline that he gave him, and the different things.
You.
I mean, it's not
the
that.
guy is, it's all about personal with him.
Yes.
Donald Trump is not home at night reading the briefing books, I promise you.
The panelists are right on this point. The constant criticism and negative framing of Donald Trump does not seem to be weakening him. If anything, it may be doing the opposite. Instead of pushing voters away, that pressure appears to reinforce his outsider image and strengthen his bond with people who already feel ignored by traditional politics. For many supporters, the intensity of the opposition only confirms what they already believe. And what makes this even more striking is where that support is growing. Donald Trump has made gains with groups that leaned Democratic for decades: Black voters, Hispanic voters, and even some women voters. Not a majority, but enough to matter in close races. And that should worry every Democratic National Committee strategist, because this approach may not just be failing, it may actually be helping Donald Trump expand his coalition. And once that pattern becomes clear, it gets much harder to argue the strategy is still working.
However, the idea of the status quo having been successful, when you see how quickly the next generation has had a completely different life than the one before, it's hard for people to truly trust that the old guard knows what they're doing in the long run. I mean, a generation ago, they were still saying UFOs, for Christ's sakes. Well, is now UAP, So the idea of all these things are happening. I mean, you look at it, and young people, maybe they don't have it wrong.
No, it's still the
economy. Maybe it's the others who do.
Well, it could be both. I mean, it's the economy, stupid. I've asked this question so many weeks on this show, and I can never get an answer. I just don't understand the American economy. I really don't. I don't understand how there could be so much wealth, and I pay so much in taxes, and it doesn't seem to get to the people. Like, I don't even mind doing it. Over half, always, way over half.
Now the conversation takes a sharper turn, and this is where it gets revealing. Bill Maher presses Gavin Newsom with a direct question: whereas all the tax money going California remains one of the highest tax states in the country, residents pay a premium, but the results often do not seem to match, not even close. Bill Maher points to the high-speed rail project, years of delays, rising costs, and limited visible progress. At the same time, homelessness continues to dominate headlines, with growing encampments raising concerns about safety and quality of life. The delays are there, the overruns are there, the unresolved problems are there. For Bill Maher, this is not just about taxes, it is about accountability. If residents are paying more, they expect functioning systems and visible results, not bigger problems, despite massive spending. Music, and that frustration did not come out of nowhere.
Democrats, my God, please find somebody who can lead. Gavin Newsom is out here in California. Pulling off in his own way what I think he wants to. He's being known more for trolling Trump on his podcast or with other interviews than what he's actually doing in the state of California. They think that's leadership because they don't have it.
And the Democrats, my God, please find somebody who can lead. Gavin Newsom is out here in California pulling off in his own way what he thinks he wants to. He is being known more for trolling Donald Trump on his podcast or in interviews than what he is actually doing in the state of California. They think that is leadership because they do not have it. And Stephen A. Smith's point lands just as hard. His argument is not really about how much is taxed, it is about where the money goes. He says the real frustration comes from spending priorities that feel disconnected from what everyday Americans actually need instead of focusing on infrastructure, public safety, and economic stability. Officials often pour money into large projects that feel distant from voters' daily concerns, and that frustration is not limited to one party, but critics argue it appears more pronounced within the Democratic Party, where spending ambitions can feel bigger, bolder, and further removed from what voters asked for. Still, the larger point remains the same. Americans are not just frustrated about paying taxes, they are frustrated about paying taxes and not seeing results. They want visible outcomes, measurable outcomes, and many feel they are not getting them. And maybe that is why Stephen A. Smith's point hits so hard.
The problem that I'm having with this conversation right now is that we're accusing the politicians of not knowing. They know. $39+ trillion in debt.
Yeah.
You can't pay TSA workers $1 billion over the last month, but you could spend $800 million to $2 billion a day. And somehow, some way, you find that money to finance a war. You knew you had the damn money. You knew where it was. You knew how you wanted to allocate it, and you knew you didn't want it to go to the American people. That ain't ignorance. That's viciousness. That's cruelty. That's not thinking about the American public.
And that is where the debate comes full circle. Voices like Bill Maher and Stephen A. Smith are not just criticizing individuals, they are pointing to deeper structural problems inside the Democratic National Committee. Critics point to messaging that leaves younger voters without full context, leadership decisions that raise questions about experience, spending that draws attention, but not always results, and a political strategy toward Donald Trump that may be backfiring. Put it all together, and the picture becomes clear. The Democratic National Committee's problem was never a lack of ideas. It is a lack of clarity, a gap in accountability, and a growing disconnect from the everyday Americans. The party says it represents not just a political problem, not just a strategy problem, a trust problem. And if those concerns go unaddressed, critics believe the party risks losing ground with the very voters it is trying hardest to win. And that is the real takeaway. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.